Thank you all for joining us this evening. On behalf of the Commission for Blacks, the Vice Chancellor for the Diversity and Inclusion, UT Project Grad, and the UT Chapter of Manners, we welcome you to the African American Trailblazer Series. My name is Asia White, and I am joined today by Sharina Domingo and Lauren Hunt. We are pre-college mentors with the UT Project Grad Summer Institute, a residential pre-college enrichment experience based out of the College of Education, Health, and Human Sciences. The other students co-sponsoring this evening's events are members of the UT Chapter of Manners based out of the College of Agriculture, Sciences, and Natural Resources. Manners stands for Minorities in Agricultural, Natural Resources, and Related Sciences. It is a national society that offers students opportunities to enhance leadership, organizational, and speaking skills, and to experience professional critique of scholarly work. The Commission for Blacks and the Office for Diversity and Inclusion created the African American Trailblazer Series to recognize and celebrate the accomplishments of African Americans affiliated with the University of Tennessee. Whether they are alumni, faculty, or staff, these individual trailblazers and their disciplines are within the fields of diversity, inclusion, and social justice. Tonight events open the second year of this exciting series.
Good evening. My name is Sharina Domingo, and I am thrilled to introduce Mr. Halloran Hilton Hill. Mr. Hill joins us again this year as the moderator for the African American Trailblazer Series. Halloran Hill is a talk radio host on News Talk 98.7 WOKI Knoxville and a television talk show host of Anything is Possible on WBIR TV in Knoxville. Hill also works as a singer-songwriter, an author, a motivational speaker, and a trainer. He wrote Who Would Imagine a King along with Mervyn Warren, which was recorded by Whitney Houston for the film The Preacher's Wife and was also included on the film's Grammy-nominated soundtrack. Let's all give a warm welcome to Mr. Halloran Hill.
Good evening. My name is Lauren Hunt, and I'm honored to provide the introduction for Dr. Michael Nettles. Dr. Michael Nettles is Senior Vice President at the Educational Testing Service and the Edmund W. Gordon Chair of their Policy Evaluation and Research Center. Dr. Nettles has a national reputation as a policy researcher on educational assessment, student performance and achievement, educational equity, and higher education finance policy. In 2014, President Obama appointed Dr. Nettles to the President's Advisory Commission on Educational Excellence for African Americans. A native of Nashville, Tennessee, Nettles earned his bachelor's degree in political science at the University of Tennessee. He went on to receive master's degrees in political science and higher education and a PhD in education at Iowa State University. Please join us in welcoming Dr. Michael Nettles to the African American Trailblazer Series.
Thank you. Let's give those young ladies another round of applause. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. The Trailblazer Series is just that, a series of conversation with people who have blazed trails. Last year we had an outstanding first season, and tonight I would encourage you to do something. Anytime you're in the presence of a trailblazer, it's always an opportunity to take notes. You will hear something in this conversation that I would call either a log or lighter fluid, something that you can put on your passion, your aspiration to kind of kickstart where you want to go and where you want to be. And then as you hear things that encourage and inspire you, pass that message along to your friends. One of the things we'd like to do with the series is create a groundswell so that at our next event, we'll have even more people here, and if you tell them how good it was, it'll be that way. So we'll also have an opportunity for Q&A, and I just want to say it's an honor to be with you tonight, and let's have a great time and conversation with a great trailblazer. Welcome this evening.
Thank you, Halloran. Thank you.
When you hear the word trailblazer, did you expect that of yourself? Do you see yourself as a trailblazer?
I think the first time I thought that I was a trailblazer was when I was invited to this event.
Right. So we finally we deputize you as an official trailblazer.
Well, thank you. I accept. No, I feel very often privileged to do the work that I do, and I very often look back on my experiences and I think about how many times, they were unexpected experiences and very often first-time experiences for anybody. And I think that's part of being a researcher and a scholar. We're always looking for advancing our field of work. And when you have new discoveries and new findings that seem to be different, it helps you to reinvigorate and to renew your spirit about trying to do it again. So, it's an interesting title, but I'll accept it.
All right, so you are officially a trailblazer. Most trailblazers that I've met don't intend to be trailblazers. Their curiosity takes them to a point where there is no trail, and instead of giving up, they decide to make one. So it typically is their passion, their purpose, something that they envision doing, and maybe it hasn't been done, but that's not a reason that it can't be done. So let's rewind first so we can get a kind of a context for your life, and let's go back to Nashville, Tennessee, and let's meet the young man, the boy, Michael Nettles. Tell us a little bit about your background and your family in Nashville.
Sure. Actually, my family moved to Nashville in 1960. I was born in Pascagoula, Mississippi, and moved there when I was 5 years old. My father was in the Air Force and had an ROTC appointment at Tennessee State University. And so I went there. My family converted to Catholicism. We joined St. Vincent de Paul Parish. It was a parish run by Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament and Franciscan priests. And so I grew up in that parish from second grade through eighth grade.
Brothers and sisters?
2 sisters. One is 5 years older, and the other is 10 years younger. And I usually think of my older sister as our trailblazer in the family for my siblings.
I want to get to her impact on you, since you see her as your trailblazer.
Yeah.
But tell me about what kind of boy you were.
Well, I was born with some physical challenges. I was born with scoliosis and a broken collarbone, and so part of my childhood I spent, getting corrections on physical issues.
Did you have to wear a brace?
In high school, I did, but I was athletic, and I loved sports. I played in my elementary school basketball team. My mother would never allow me to play football because she had a classmate in her high school who was paralyzed for life. And coaches visited my house because I was pretty good as a quarterback. And my classmates wanted me to be on the football team, and the coaches would come by. My mother would not yield to that. I was a very good baseball player, and I pitched and played shortstop, and sometimes in the outfield in baseball. So,
was there an aspiration for pro sports?
Yes, I grew up thinking I was going to be Juan Marichal, who many of you don't know him, but he was a pitcher for the San Francisco Giants, and I came to the University of Tennessee thinking somehow I could still become a pitcher for the San Francisco Giants. And that was my favorite team, even though I'd never lived in California. But many people here will remember Willie Mays and Willie McCovey and the Alou brothers and all of those famous baseball players who were San Francisco Giants. So I thought I would be a baseball player. But when I was in high school, I started wearing a brace. It was called the Milwaukee brace, and it sort of, the way it worked is they would stretch me out on a machine, literally. So I had to stretch my body and then wrap me in a mold, and then ultimately I had a brace. And I had aspirations of going out for the baseball team. I played tennis through all of that. And one day I went to my orthopod at Vanderbilt University. His name was Arthur Brooks. And after he did all the physical examination, he closed the door, put all the residents out. He was kind of a rock star physician. And he said to me, he said, son, your future's in your academics. He says, you should play sports for fun, and but you are not going to be a professional baseball player.
So as I've asked you to kind of give us some highlights from your youth,
Yeah.
you immediately tracked to sports, and I don't know if you considered this a disability. Did you consider yourself with the scoliosis having a disability? You didn't see yourself that way.
I didn't.
So
no.
you had aspirations that were attached to your abilities.
Yeah, I always viewed it as temporary.
So when you get the word that the thing that you think you were born to do, whether it was baseball, basketball, tennis, whatever, when you get the word from a credible source that the thing you believe you were born to do is not the thing you're going to be able to do, what does that do to the contour of aspiration in your life?
Well, it wasn't immediate acceptance, but it was a process of realization.
Were you angry?
No, I wasn't angry. I still kept trying. In fact, my mother did not allow me to stop dreaming. In fact, I can remember the Cincinnati Reds came to town and had a tryout session. She took me over for it, and I participated. It was very interesting. So, and I continued to pursue academics. But what I did do was I turned my attention to journalism.
Really?
And
why did you turn to that?
I wanted to be I wanted to become a sports writer, and that was my next.
So you were trying to find some connective tissue to the world of sports?
Yeah, I grew up loving sports. In fact, some of the statistical talent that I have was groomed through my knowledge of sports. There was a time when I think I could have literally told you every baseball player's batting average.
Really?
I traded baseball.
By the way, this was the kid I wanted to sit next to during test. Right? This is the guy.
I traded baseball cards with friends. We had lots of fun doing those kind of things. But then in high school, my principal, I went to Father Ryan High School in Nashville, and my principal was a man named Ross Fleming. And he had a speech impediment. He was a great priest. But he called me over the intercom at the end of school one day in my sophomore year of high school. And my freshman year, we were an all-boys school, and then we went co-ed the second year. But he called me in, and when you get summoned to the principal's office when you're in high school at the end of the school day, you think that there's nothing good about that, right? I mean, what could possibly be happening that, But he actually called me because Billboard magazine called him up, and they were looking for a mail boy for the company. They had an office in Nashville. And he said, I know that you're interested in journalism, and I think you should go down and meet them if you're interested. So I went and met with them, and they hired me. And I became the mail boy for the Billboard magazine, which meant that I, met a lot of advertising agents in town. I delivered packages in the company car. I bought postage at the post office, and I did mass mailings. Thousands of envelopes went out. I actually touched each one of them in the process. And over time, I got to know the writers, the journalists in the company. And they took an interest in me, trying to cultivate my writing talent in the magazine. And there's a story about that, too. So when I came to UT, I took my first courses in this building.
Wow. Comes full circle. He took his first course in this building. But you graduated in poli-sci?
From here, yes.
So why not journalism from here?
It's an interesting question. So Billboard magazine actually hired me to write, cover concerts in Knoxville while I was here. And I could do it, so I can remember.
Let me make sure everybody understands that this is free tickets to every concert, right?
Exactly.
You got a charmed life so far.
And my roommate, who was my good friend in high school, and I used to go down to the concert. I can remember covering Charlie Daniels and War. My freshman year, and writing an article, and we got paid by the size of the article. So my check came in, and we split it. But anyway, it's an interesting story. So back in those days, one of the first things you had to do as a journalism student was to take a typing test. And the requirement was that you take this test and type 30 words a minute with no errors. And at that time, there wasn't even, you couldn't use an electric typewriter. You had to use a manual typewriter. And I had some dexterity issues. And so I got up to 27 words on the first test, and there was no forgiveness in this building. I mean, wow. It was 30 words. And at the time, I was taking a political science course that I was really enjoying, American government. And I continued to take journalism courses. My father wanted me to study in the business school, and I wound up in political science. And it was and some of the history courses and political science courses I took here were just fantastic.
You know, what's interesting is that, so you can't pass the typing test in the School of Journalism, but you're writing for Billboard magazine. So you're getting checks for journalism,
yeah.
But you can't. Right. So
yeah.
That's
yeah. Yeah. So that is interesting. So the difference is that is interesting because it also is a difference very often in standardized testing.
Yeah. See, I
could actually do that work in my room. I could write for an hour, take my time. I could change and work on something else. I could come back to it in the morning. And it had a deadline, but I would start far enough in advance of the deadline to allow me to complete the task.
So what I've noticed, and what I've noticed about all Trailblazers, is you have an idea of the direction of your life, and then things happen in any story. But there's always some determination to keep going and to find a way. And I see this kind of laying out in your story, but I also see the pieces of your story pushing you in the direction of a purpose.
Right.
Because you said the statistics, the testing, all of the things that were going on started to make you think about the world.
Right.
And the power of education to transform people.
Yeah, and and it's some of that, and it's also some of the mechanics as well. So in my room, I could use an electric typewriter. But yes, and it's also, I found in my career and in my life, being flexible and open to opportunities that, because very often we don't know what we want to do. And at that time, one of the most interesting things happening in the state was how colleges and universities were being funded. And the funding formula, the Tennessee Higher Ed Commission was just getting started. There was statewide planning in higher education. And so I got really interested in that and tried to relate my political science instruction to what was happening in public policy in the state.
So I want to talk about your experience at UT and then going forward, but we haven't talked about you being an African American male.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about you being an African American male in the Catholic school system or here at the University of Tennessee.
Yeah.
Did you, as an African American male, I'm making an assumption, so I need clarity. I'm assuming that in the Catholic school system, there were not a lot of African American males, but you can disabuse me of that notion. Is that correct?
Well, in my elementary school, there were 2 white students.
See,
everybody else was African American.
So So when you got to
high school, that was a diocesan school, and all of the parochial schools in the city, there must have been 10, say, parochial schools, went to this high school if you were a boy. And if you were a girl, you went to one of the girls' schools. And then we became co-ed. But in high school, I was in the minority for the first time. But, you know, it's interesting because we experienced a lot of turmoil during the 70s when I was in high school. I entered high school in 69, and in the 70s. And you know what was going on in the country, the war and the racial atmosphere in the country, and especially in the South and in the state of Tennessee, was very difficult at that time. But, you know, as an African American male, it was always my preference to be to be an African American male. I was really
you
proud.
had a choice.
You know, you know, you know, it was.
I didn't know you could opt out, but
and I often tried to establish the imagery in my identity, my public image, based upon African American males, and so I was very proud. And
so which African American male was your icon? In other words, who were you copying and pasting? What African American male did you look to as your role model, and you said, I've got to show up in the world like this?
Well, I think, you know, it's easy to say, but, you know, we had people in that time like Martin Luther King, for sure. And I can remember when he was assassinated in Memphis, the priest in my school came and asked for 2 people to go down to the state capitol with him in protest. I mean, the city was burning. Jefferson Street, you know, North Nashville, was in turmoil, and we went down to. So I really, you know, had a great deal of admiration and respect for King. Thurgood Marshall was another one. There were so many, though. I mean, Marvin Gaye, Jimi Hendrix, everybody. I mean, just lots
Did
of.
your dad factor into your set
Yes.
of icons?
Yeah, my father was in the Air Force, and so in the ROTC program at Tennessee State, you know, one of the things I looked forward to after school was going to work, going where he was to work, and one of his assignments was to be the instructor for the drill team at Tennessee State, and I can remember going through those processes with him and learning a lot about what it was like to be a college student. I was around them a lot, so yeah. But he was always, and still is. He's 86 years old now, and still is the person I look up to the most. So
Is your mother still alive?
My mother passed away in 2010.
Sorry.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move from the University of Tennessee. You decide to study poli-sci, and you leave here. Do you go immediately to Iowa State?
Yes. Yeah. So I.
Wait, what was that laugh right there?
Yeah.
There's a story in there.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. So one of the things I did when I was here was I met my wife my freshman year here at UT, and we became RAs, resident assistants in the dormitories. She was in Humes Hall, and I was in North Carrick. Actually, she was in South Carrick. I was in North Carrick, and then later we went to Humes and Reese Hall in the presidential complex. And so we went through these orientation sessions with the leadership here in the residence hall program, and there was a gentleman named Ken Stoner, who eventually became director of residence life here after going away to Kansas and coming back. But at that time, he was the associate director. Jim Grubb was the director of housing. And one day, Ken Stoner called me to his office, and he said, I know you're interested in state policy, and I'm director of the Akuho Journal. This is the college and university housing journal. It's a peer-reviewed journal. He said, every now and then we'll ask a student to write for the Akuho publication. Would you be interested in doing it? So I did. I took him up on it, and I said, well, I'm going to write about student government because I got sort of involved in elections on campus and part of the Student Government Association. I was appointed to one of the Board of Trustees committees on alumni affairs. And so I got really interested in higher education policy. So I wrote this, and at that time, you can remember, if you recall, there was a lot of student activism, and students were taking, more responsibility for the governance of, so we thought, of institutions, and we were participating in the leadership. So I wrote an article that got published in the Akuho Journal called Governance of the Students by the Students. And they published it, they accepted it, and went on. So I became friends with Ken Stoner in that way. And when I got interested in going to graduate school, my process for doing this was to write almost every graduate school in the country, order a catalog, and this was before the web, the World Wide Web, So these were days when you literally sent off, with the first class stamp envelopes. And one of my jobs, incidentally, at the university was working in the mailroom in the student center. That was my first job.
And you had worked in the mailroom at Billboard.
At Billboard, so I had a lot of experience.
Yeah.
So
no wasted time.
No, that's right. That's right. But one of the most interesting things there was when international students came regularly to the mailroom. It was an educational experience because they were sending and writing messages back home. But anyway, I wrote to almost every noted graduate program in the country. And I had a room full of catalogs. And I set a target of reading one of them each day, going through it. And I narrowed down my choice to about a handful, about 6 universities. And I was having difficulty trying to decide where to go. And so I called Ken Stoner and I asked him his advice. And it just so happened that one of the institutions that I had narrowed my choices down to was Iowa State University. And Ken coincidentally had gone to graduate school at Iowa State and maybe even had been an undergraduate student there. But the reason I liked Iowa State was for 2 reasons. One is, I don't know if it's true today, but back in those days, the language was so plain and simple, the way people in Iowa wrote. And it was true of the Des Moines Register in your field. You know that it has a reputation of being clearly written. So I read that all of the material from Iowa State University, and it was just crystal clear. I had no questions about what I could major in, whether I could have 2 majors, how long it was going to take. It was just all there. And so I liked it, and the more I looked into it, the more I liked it because they also had a man there named Stan Ahman, who had been the 2nd director of the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And he had been, when it was at Education Commission of the States in Boulder, Colorado. He was a famous psychologist. And I knew that I was interested in assessment because Tennessee had started performance funding. And one of the mechanisms for performance funding was to try to measure student achievement. And I was interested in funding because of the appropriation stuff. So it all came down to that Iowa State had a lot that I was interested in studying, and I understood it. I felt like I didn't even have to visit. Yeah.
And so as most writers realize that, humanity, clarity, brevity, simplicity, those are not simple things. When you take big ideas and you render them in a very clear fashion, it also, great writing improves your thinking. So here you are, a writer. You have a writer's instinct and a writer's curiosity, but you also are following this path that is unfolding before you. I think what surprises me about you, though, is I'm assuming that you're 21?
I was
22?
I was 20. I came here when I was 17.
Right, so you're 20 years old.
Yeah.
What's amazing is that at 20 you had this kind of clarity about who you were, what you wanted to be, and what you were interested in. At least it seems now.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I started school here, I started in the summer of '73, and I didn't stop until I finished. So I finished in 3 years. I graduated in '76. And I went to graduate school immediately. My sister was my mentor in that respect because she had gone to a master's program already. So I watched her go through college and then to graduate school, and also I remained in the residence hall program. I eventually became an assistant head resident here. And when I went to Iowa State University, funded my graduate work through my work in the residence hall. I became a hall director.
Wow.
So I was able to.
So it seems like you've been able to leverage every experience you've had to move you forward. There was no wasted time.
Well, maybe no wasted time, but you're right. I'm by nature a planner. I sort of think forward, 5 to 10 years ahead of where I might want to be and what I might, and the steps to get there. So there's still, even when you do that, a lot of unknown territory, and you're breaking new ground. And one of the things I wanted to do at Iowa State was to bring together my political science and education interest, and higher education interest. And so I was able to start a master's program in higher education and political science at the same time, 2 separate master's programs. Now, what I had to do was to make a choice between which one I could finish in 1 year and which I could finish in 2 years. So I chose the political science in 2 years, finished the master's in higher education, and then entered a doctoral program in higher education. My PhD is in higher education from Iowa State. And so I started that, so I was staggering the degree programs. And when I finished the coursework and took the preliminary examination, I was 22 years old, I think, for my PhD.
Wow.
And
can we just stop and say wow? Can we get a wow in on that?
Well,
but that's not normal. The way you're feathering your story out is almost like this is just what you do. So you work on 2 masters at the same time, and you flip it and parlay it into a PhD, and you land it at 22.
Yeah.
We don't do. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. So between at the end of the first summer, at the end of the first school year at Iowa State, I went back to Nashville, and I worked in the Higher Ed Commission. And this is the place that was doing the state planning. It was doing the coordination of the appropriations for colleges and universities. And it was also doing the performance funding activities. So I wanted to see firsthand how and who was working on this. So I went there, and I walked in and asked if I could come there to work, and they said, sure, but we don't know if we're going to have how our budget's going to look. I went there on spring break in they said, come back, call or come back, in May and we'll have a better idea. So I went back, I called, and they got back to me and they said, well, sorry, we don't have any money. We'd love to have you, but our budget won't allow us to do this. So I said, well, okay, don't let that stop us. I'll come. I'll live with my parents, and I'll come to work there just like you're paying me. And we'll be just fine. And so I did. I went there.
You worked free.
I worked for free, and they liked my work, and they decided halfway through that they could pay me. And they retroacted the pay. And so it was very interesting how that unfolded. I was very fortunate. They invited me to come back to work there after I finished. So after I finished my qualifying exam, Stan Almond was my major professor. He was the person who I was interested in studying with. And I took the written exam and then did the oral examination. And the committee grilled me over the questions, and we had a good conversation for an hour and a half. And then they left, and they met, and then Stan invited me into his office, and he said, okay, the committee liked your work. The written exam is fine. The oral exam is fine. He said, but there's one issue that the committee has with you, and that is that you've not worked a full-time job. And we think that it shows up in your presentation. He says that the only way to address that is to go to work. We don't want you to touch your pen. We don't want you to even work on the dissertation for a year. We just want you to go to work. And so the Higher Ed Commission had invited me to come back, and I went there to work. My salary was $12,500 a year, and I got married. My wife and I got married that September. And so she was a teacher in the public school system in Nashville, and so I worked about 10 days before I started privately, secretly working on my dissertation. It was very difficult not to keep on track. It was easy for Stan to say, get out of here, go to work, come back in a year, we'll talk. So when I went back in a year, I was able to talk to him about what I really wanted to do. We're focused on my dissertation, and I actually started designing and actually conducting, designing the instruments to collect the data and so on. So I wrote a dissertation and finished it all. That was 78 when I went to the Higher Ed Commission. And in 80, I graduated with my PhD. So that's when I had 2 masters and a PhD.
Wow, that's very impressive. So what I see through your life is a certain momentum. Like, you're very strategic in your thinking and your planning, but also in your execution. You go get it. I mean, you have a vision of what you want. Also, the other thing that I note is a job well done opens doors. So if you're in the mailroom and you do that well, you end up writing. If you work for someone for free, but the quality of the work is excellent and undeniable, they end up bringing you there. The people that you work for along the way, they have a vested interest in your future, and they tend to help you if they see that momentum and that aspiration and the execution. Now you're at this point in your life, and looking back, when I interview people, I try to listen so I can hear clues and cues. I see what's in your bio. I see the accomplishments. What do you think is the most significant thing you've done? How do you rate it? When you look at all the research, all the accomplishment, all the stuff in testing, all the stuff with the United Negro College, but all of the things that you've done, when you look at your life and you measure it, what thing that you've done do you say, that's what it was all for? It was for that moment, that accomplishment, that thing, that was most connected to my purpose. That's the thing that I would put in front of people and say, not me, but this thing is important.
Well, that's a that's a very good question, and I'll give you an answer, and I'm sure that when I walk out of here, I'll say maybe it was something else. But one of the most interesting, two things came to mind. My experience here as being the first vice president for assessment in the country was really meaningful to me, and the opportunity to come back to work at the university, to work with Lamar Alexander, the Otis Robinson, other people here at the university was just a great experience, and I had an opportunity to do a lot of things. But the other one that comes to mind, and maybe the one that I would stand on, is when I worked at the United Negro College Fund. I was the founding director of the Frederick Douglass Patterson Research Institute. Now, Frederick Patterson was the first fundraiser for UNCF. He was the founder of UNCF. And coincidentally, he was also an alumnus of Iowa State University. And the Frederick Patterson Research Institute was named for him. The opportunity there to work with Bill Gray, who was a congressman from Philadelphia before becoming president and CEO of the United Negro College Fund. But what I did there was to produce the most comprehensive books on African American education in the country. And it still may be the most comprehensive collection of data. The only thing that you need to do is to update it with current data and information. We did it in 3 volumes, and there are lots of stories behind it, but I'll tell you one that'll give you an impression of what it was like. So at that time, I was a professor at the University of Michigan. I left the university a year after Lamar left. The people who became, Joe Johnson became president of the university, and we were great friends. He was terrific. He was an institution. But I felt like I needed to, become an academic again, and the University of Michigan invited me to join. When Bill Gray was looking for a director for the Patterson Institute, he did a search. They met lots of people, and I went to talk to him. The person who recruited me was with Heidrick and Struggles, a search firm. Asked me if I would do this, and I said, no, I'm not leaving my academic appointment yet. She said, well, won't you at least go speak to Mr. Gray? And so I did, and I said, look, we can do this if the university will support it, and I retain my academic appointment, and I'll teach one course, and I'll come down here and spend the rest of the week, and I'll go back and forth between Fairfax, Virginia, and Ann Arbor. University got really engaged, put money into it, and lots of me. And I've traveled for 3 years in doing that. Now, there are lots of places that give money to UNCF, and there are lots of places that give equipment to UNCF. And IBM was one of the places that contributed equipment, but none of the equipment was suitable for doing the level of data analysis that we were doing and the kind of comprehensive analysis that we were charting to do. So there are lots of stories about how I had to go out and raise the funding to get this work done in a short period of time, and we produced one volume of those books in 1.5 years each, with national press conference releases, congressional people coming over. In fact, Dick Riley, when he was the Secretary of Education, came over and participated. And I think to this day, we can look at that as a model of, a comprehensive collection of data about.
What story did the data show?
Well, it showed that we had made substantial progress, which was being overlooked at the time. And we concluded that in order to make further progress, people needed to know that it was possible. And so we reported a lot of positive stories about increases in enrollment, increases in graduation from college and high school. The rates were going up. We debunked lots of myths. I mean, there was a famous, and still famous, story about how African Americans, there were more African American males in prison than in college, and that was absolutely not the truth. And we produced the data. Plus, they were comparing apples to oranges. I mean, college students are typically, and especially at that time, between 18 and 24, still 80% of them are. And, people who are incarcerated span a broader age range. And still there were not as many, there were more college students than there were. Another thing that we debunked was the myth about peer pressure among African Americans, and we've demonstrated that it was no more prevalent in African Americans. So, the phrase of acting white if you're smart, like if you're studying and that. Well, we found that was true in every race ethnic group. There's that same kind of pressure. We found that on things like charitable giving, African American women were the most prominent givers of, contributors to charities and those kind of things. So we found an awful lot of good, positive stories. And in fact, we had a report to come out. The last report I did there was called 2 Decades of Progress. And Bill Gray started telling me, he said, "Mike, I like what you're doing." He said, "You're telling good news." He says, "And we're raising more money because of it." He said, "People like to give to positive results." So I was not hesitant to talk about the challenges that we face, because we still have enormous challenges, but we told an awful lot of positive stories with the data.
You can see some of the DNA of that even in the current campaigns now, where it talks about on the return on your investment, that in fact that there is progress that is being made and it will be made.
Yeah, and I can remember also we made a big contribution from that effort. So I think this is the right answer, actually. We made a big contribution to that effort on the affirmative action court cases that were going on at the time, and demonstrated that about one third of the admissions decisions were clearly affirmative action case, where people were actually getting sort of help in the admissions process, but the other 2/3 was not. And so, Colin Powell was on the UNCF board at the time, Bob Johnson was, and Michael Jordan was chair of it, not the basketball player, but the Time Warner magazine. And I remember Bill Gray asking me to make a presentation to them about this and how moved they were about the data and the information that we bring forward. So it was an interesting experience.
Tell me about your family. You have children?
I do. I have 3 daughters, and my first daughter was born in Princeton, New Jersey. She's 28 years old. She was born in 1987. Her name is Anna Simone. My second daughter's name is Sabin Alexia, and she's 24, and she was born here. And the third daughter was born in Michigan, and she is 20. So they're 4 years apart, all born in August. I even have one on the 1st, born on the 1st, and one on the 31st. So it had to be. My wife was born on August 29th. Her mother was born on August 13th. Her mother's name was Augustine. And my wife was born in Augusta, Georgia. It's very interesting. But my oldest daughter is a law student at Washington University. She's finishing her 3rd year of law school. My second daughter is a first-year PhD student in neuroscience at WashU in St. Louis. And the third daughter is at the University of Alabama as a junior. She's a dance and majoring in the honors program there. So
that's awesome. And August is the 9th month of the year, so we know what Christmas is like. Right? All right. So why don't we take some time for some Q&A? And thank you for giving us a window into your story. Wasn't that fascinating?
Well, thank you.
In the last moments here, we'd like to open up the floor to questions from you. And if you have questions for Dr. Nettles, we'd love to hear from you. Just raise your hand, and we'll pass you the microphone so that it'll get on the video.
Dr. Nettles, thank you for being with us and for sharing a little bit about you and your journey. I've seen and aware some of the work that you've done nationally on African American males and males of color in STEM. Could you talk a little bit about some of that work and some of the interests in supporting some of that?
Yeah. So I'm interested.
Did everybody hear that, by the way? Okay.
So the question has to do with African American males and especially in STEM fields, and my involvement in studying African American males. So this is an interesting topic, and I have a variety of interests, not all in African Americans and African American males and so on, but over the past 5 years, I've spent a lot of time working and thinking about African American males, and it started with in a conversation with the Children's Defense Fund and Marian Wright Edelman about the topic. And if you know Marian Wright Edelman, she's going to tell you, 50 ideas, and you have to lock in on one. And so we decided that we would focus on African American males as a topic. And we've convened 4 symposiums, 5 actually symposiums over the past 5 years on the topic. And of course, when I start examining an issue, the first thing I do is to try to think about how to solve a problem that exists within the topic. And for me, the first problem was that all of the conversation in the country about African American males at the time was about 20 million people. That's how many there are in the U.S. There are about 40 million people in the country, and a little less than half of them are men or boys. And so there was a lot of conversation about how what the problems were and what the source of the problems were. And I decided that in order to address it, you had to divide the population up into smaller pieces. That if we were talking about males generally, we were simply having a rhetorical conversation. That if you wanted to solve the problems of boys, you had to focus on boys. And within the adolescent population or the childhood population, there were several groups there. So we started off by thinking about it in terms of birth to age 9. Okay? And so when you start thinking about birth to age 9 in African American boys in that age group, there are only 3.5 million in the country. The same thing with middle schoolers, there are 1.7 million, and with high schoolers, 1.7 million. All of a sudden, you begin to think that you might even be able to get the country behind solving a problem. I mean, 3.5 million is not many people, right? Not only that, but then I started looking at where they live, and I discovered that that a quarter of them lived in 3 states: Georgia, Florida, and Texas. And so if you wanted to solve a problem, maybe you should start thinking about Florida, Georgia, and Texas first. Over half of the boys live in 8 states, and 75% in 13 states. So all of a sudden, you're not talking about the whole country, not for this issue. You're talking about locations. You're talking about trying to. So one of the things I think one of the contributions we made to this was to think about. And each one of these places, I mean, these boys have Congress people, right, and representatives. And then you start asking the question, well, what are they doing on this particular topic in the place where they live, right? I mean, where they're. And so we started thinking about the schools and the quality of schools, the quality of the environments, and those kind of things. Another thing we did was take a look at income inequality and other data like that in these places. And we discovered that there is a correlation between the quality of life in these communities and the presence of these populations. So Atlanta is a good example. Of the 50 largest cities in the country, Atlanta has the largest income inequality. The top 5% of people in Atlanta earn $280,000 a year. This is not wealth. This is before you factor in wealth. It's just the household income. The bottom 20% have a household income of $14,000 a year. And that's where most of these African American boys are living, in those communities, right? So you start think about how to solve this problem. So what we've got here is a problem that can actually be addressed if you divide it up into population. College student issues and challenges are different from the preschool issues, and the way you go about solving the issues. And each one of these reports, we have for each one of these symposiums, we developed a statistical profile, and we also have recommendations about what could be done to improve the plight of males. Now, one of the things you ask about STEM, the biggest thing that we think that would contribute to improving the quality of STEM the production of people who have STEM degrees is to start early with science and mathematics. And one of the challenges that we face as African Americans in the country is having high quality instruction in mathematics and science in school and out of school. And it's a huge problem in Tennessee. If we really want to produce scientists, we have the talent, we have the capacity. It's just that we have to have early orientation, and it has to be continuous. It has to be inside and outside of class, and it just has to become a way of people's life. And we just don't have that happening enough.
Question for you about your glasses.
Yeah.
Do I detect a touch of orange in the glasses?
You do.
And are you representing for Tennessee with that?
I am.
I just noticed.
Yeah. So actually, the way I get glasses, and I've for the past 15 years, I've had lots of compliments on my glasses, but at the last day of the year, the calendar year, my wife and 3 daughters go with me to buy glasses. Otherwise, I would come out with something totally different from this. But I'm
just going to ask you, do you want to be president of a college or university? A, do you want to be president? B, do you want to be president of the University of Tennessee?
Well, let's see. I think the last time I looked, the University of Tennessee had a president.
Right. But I'm not suggesting that he should leave. I know you left when Lamar left, and I wondered if you wanted to be president after Lamar.
Well, let's see. When Lamar hired me, I think I was 33 years old. I was a vice president here for the system. Or something like that, and it was a very good experience. And but I don't. The other thing I wanted to do when I was in graduate school and in college here was I wanted to run for governor of the state of Tennessee.
Okay.
And when my friends in Iowa State would ask me what I was going to do in the future, I would tell them, it became a joke. They would say, he's going to be the governor of Tennessee. But
so are you making an announcement?
No. So the way I look at that is that if it ever happened, and if it were, if the time is right and I'm the right person, I would do it. But it's not something that I'm pursuing or want to pursue. There's so many things that I'm trying to do that I would be restricted and confined from doing if I had to be president, because your calendar and your schedule is not your,
Right. So we've got time for maybe 2 more questions. Anybody else have a question for Governor Nettles? Right here, your question for, I'm sorry.
Say if you were.
I'm sorry.
My question is more of a hypothetical question. Say if you didn't really go on this path you came to become a trailblazer. If you had to choose between 2 paths, one was to reach unlimited success, if that's possible.
I'm sorry, I'm not getting your question. I'm sorry.
I'll say that. If you had to choose between 2 paths, one was to reach success, which most people have already tried, or would you if you try to reach trying to be content with what you are, with what you've accomplished so far, which one would you have chosen?
So he's saying, is there a binary choice between success and contentment?
Oh.
Right. So is that kind of what you were saying? If you're trying to reach for money, fame, success versus just doing something that makes you content, are they mutually exclusive? Is that a binary? Or can you find both? Am I close to where you are? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think thank you for the question. So I think I find contentment in achievement. I think I'm happy in the evenings when I've made a good day and made an accomplishment toward something that I'm working on. So I'm working on a paper now, on a report on the president's goals for the country on higher education. The national goal is for 60% of the country to have a college 2-year, 4-year degree by the year 2020. The Lumina Foundation has set a comparable goal for 2025 for 60% of the population. Both the president and the Lumina Foundation have decided that in order for the country to become competitive, to stay competitive and sustain itself over time, that's what is needed. especially for the workforce of the future. So I've been doing some analysis on that, and I'm not happy in the evening unless I've made some progress in trying to move that forward. My basic argument in the paper has to do with the fact that the country could achieve it, but then some groups in the country won't be anywhere close to it. And in order to do that, I'm finding the analysis of the data have to be absolutely, irrefutable. And it involves projections, and it involves some unique analysis. It'll be some, new kind of analysis. So I can't be content until I've actually accomplished that. I'm also working on trying to think about a solution for paying for college. Okay, so I have this idea that
Let the church say.
that every community in the country has the capacity to pay the college cost of the children from that community. So basically, I'm trying to think about endowments, local endowments. This is what makes universities great. This is what can make communities great. The question is, how do you generate the revenue to do it? And I'm making an argument about how you can use the purchasing power of the community to generate the revenue if you just use the interchange rate differently. So I have lots of things that I'm working on, and I'm not going to be content until actually I see some of them happen, and then by that time I'll have more. So the choice for me is Trailblazer. Yeah,
Let's thank Dr. Nettles for a great thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
So in conclusion, Dr. Nettles, we want to present to you, I've introduced myself to you earlier.
Indeed. Thank you.
A small token of appreciation from the University of Tennessee, from the Commission for Blacks, and for the Office of Research. I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Research, and Office of Diversity and Inclusion.
Thank you so much. This was really nice. Thank you.
And please, my normal speech is research. It is another round of applause for both Mr. Hill and Dr. Nettles for this engaged conversation. We have some refreshments in the lobby, and thank you so much for this evening.
Thank you.
Halloran,
I hope that was okay.
you were fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you. What a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, you're terrific.
Thank you.
Easy to talk with. And
I'll give you my card here.
Thank you so much, and I'll send you my.
If I can ever help you, just let me know.
I will. Thank you.
My pleasure to meet you.
It's a pleasure to meet you too.
Take your microphone. I'll take that back there for him.
So you've been in Knoxville for 90 years since 90?